Hey, what's up everyone, Johnny the Geek here, and today I'm going to be building a budget-friendly Intel computer system. This is the most budget-friendly system that I can build today of about $300 to $350 US. Not only can this system run the latest Windows 7 and 8, but it also makes for a budget-friendly Hackintosh running Snow Leopard, Lion, and most likely even Mountain Lion. So the first thing I usually like to do is go over the parts, and you can find links to all of the parts here in the description of the video. So let's start with the motherboard. Today I'm using a small form factor motherboard by Gigabyte, and it is the GA H61 DS2. It has all the necessary components built in it, like Ethernet, the sound, USB ports, VGA output for integrated graphics, as well as a PCI Express slot for upgrading to a discrete graphics solution. Moving on to the memory modules. This is the Samsung low profile module, and there's no particular reason why I chose a low profile memory module. It was just at the memory that was on sale at the time, and it was the best deal. So there are two of these modules at 4 gigs each. So the total amount of RAM for the system will be 8 gigs of RAM. And at the heart of the system is the CPU, and this is the most inexpensive socket 1155 CPU Intel has. This is the G530, and it's a dual core CPU with integrated graphics and built in to the CPU itself. It's a 2.4 gigahertz processor, I believe. Even though the CPU has graphics built into it and it's capable of displaying HD video playback, I'm including an option to add a discrete graphics card solution. Still not enough to play modern graphic intensive games, but it's a good choice for a high resolution display, monitors, and light casual gaming. This card is the nVidia GT520 with 1 gig of video memory, and it has a VGA port, HDMI port, and DVI port. It is also capable of becoming a low profile card for home theater systems, and it is based on the PCI Express form factor. So the hard drive I'm using today is a Seagate Barracuda 500 gig hard drive, and it's more than enough for the OS, many kinds of different productivity software, as well as video, pictures, multimedia content, etc. Just a standard 500 gig hard drive here. Next is the power supply. Now this is something that you want to pay attention to and pick up a good quality built unit. The quality of your power supply will determine the longevity of your system running. This is the Cooler Master 500 watt Extreme, and it's a great choice for quality and performance on a budget. So it has a large fan here, and the larger the fan, the more quieter the system's going to be. And it just has a sturdy quality kind of build to it. Standard connections here that have your 24-pin ATX power connectors, PCI Express card power connector, 8-pin motherboard connectors, and then a plethora of Molex and SATA connectors. The DVD drive that I'm using is a Pioneer, but just about any DVD burner will do fine, and they are typically around $25 online. This particular DVD drive is a SATA connection, and I recommend picking up a SATA DVD drive. And to cool the CPU, I'll be using the stock Intel cooler that the CPU comes with. Alright, so the case that I'm using today is the NZXT Source 210 case. This is a very budget-friendly case of about $40 online, and I like this because of the black and white color scheme that they have here. So this is the front of the case with 2 USB ports here, the headphone and microphone jack up on the top here, 3 drive bays, the start and reset button, and that's pretty much it for the front there. And this bezel on the side here is where the air would go into. There's air intakes on the front edge of the case here. And on the top there is 2 120mm or 140mm fan exhaust or intake, however you want to configure it. On the side, there's a grill for another 120mm or 140mm fan, which is really great. On the inside here, there is already a 120mm fan that comes included with it. Space in the back for the back plate. And then on the bottom of the case, there is a grill for a 120mm fan and a grill for the power supply airflow. So the fan that's already built into the power supply can utilize this. And then on the front here, we have space for two 120mm fans to be added to bring cool air in. Also, it has the cable management grommets cut into it already. And so all in all, this makes a great budget case. It also comes in black as well. Before you begin your build, I suggest that you use an anti-static wrist strap here connected to your wrist. And this will ground yourself so that you don't accidentally discharge any static electricity onto your electronic components here. Typically, you would attach this to the chassis of your case or any other electronic device that's plugged into the wall and properly grounded. If you don't have one of these, what you can do is just touch the case of your computer, and that should be enough to dissipate any excess static electricity that you have on you. Alright, so now we're going to prep the motherboard, and I have a soft material that I have the motherboard sitting on, which is also anti-static material. But if you don't have any of this, then what you can use is the box that the motherboard comes in. Be sure that you don't use or set the motherboard on top of the anti-static bag that it comes in. Just remove the bag and only use the box if you're going to set this down on top of the box. So the first thing I'm going to be installing is the memory chips. And so before I begin, I'm going to have to open up the tabs here. And you got to be careful that you don't open these too hard or force these down, because these tabs can break. So I have my memory chip here, and I'm going to be lining up this cutout slot with this notch that's built into the memory slot. And then you'll find the little edge, little corner here, and there's a little tiny guided slot that's built into the memory slot. And we'll just go ahead and go straight down into it, into the slots there. And then you're going to want to press down. And when you press down, these tabs are going to come together naturally as you're pressing down. So when you're pressing down, these tabs will lock into place. So brace the board. It does require a little bit of energy, and you kind of want to do on this end. So once you do that, and they are locked in place, you can go ahead and install the next one. And we're done with installing the memory chip. Alright, so next we're going to install the CPU. First we begin by opening the retention bracket here. So you're just going to slide this out and move this up. Then we have to remove the CPU cover, and you have to be very careful to pull this straight out. Now we're going to remove the CPU from the packaging here. We'll go ahead and open this. Alright, so if you notice on the CPU here, there are two little notches. These are guides, as well as a little arrow indicator on the bottom here corner. Alright, and on the CPU itself, the CPU socket, there is also two little nubs here that indicate that they're going to line up with these two little notches on the CPU, as well as a little arrow on the bottom left hand corner here to indicate that that's where this arrow needs to also line up with. Alright, so what I usually like to do is that to set it down, I'll pinch the CPU with my fingers here, and on the very tip of my fingers, wait until I touch the edge of this CPU socket. And so once I touch the edge of the CPU socket there, I'll just go ahead and slowly let this go and let it slip into the socket. And so that's pretty much it for installing the CPU. We'll go ahead and close the door, and this bracket here has to go underneath this screw. And once you do that, there's a little bit of force on there, but don't be afraid thinking that you're going to break anything. As long as everything is lined up properly, you're not going to bend anything or break anything. Right. Be sure to hold on to this bracket here. If for whatever reason you ever need to return your motherboard, you will not be able to return it without this bracket. It will void your warranty if you return the motherboard for whatever reason, a defective motherboard, and you do not attach this. They will send it back to you saying that your warranty is voided, and they will not help you with anything for your motherboard. So hold on to this piece. This is a very important piece. You could also buy it, but then that's just going to cost like $5 to $10 to replace this little plastic piece here. So do not throw this away. Alright, so before I attach the CPU cooler, I'm going to be applying some thermal grease, and today I'm using Arctic Silver 5, but for this budget-friendly build you could use just about any thermal grease that you can pick up at the electronics store. And before I apply the thermal grease, I want to make sure that my surface is clean, both on the CPU and on the CPU cooler. And I'll be using the 91% isopropyl alcohol. This is rubbing alcohol that you can get at the drugstore. It's usually about like 89 cents or $1 for a bottle of this. Be sure to use 91% because you don't want a whole lot of water within this mixture. So I'm using a paper napkin here, but you can also use a coffee filter. So just go ahead and wipe this down, and you're basically wiping down any excess oil that you may have gotten when you touch the CPU. So just go ahead and wipe this down and give it a few minutes to dry. And you're going to also want to wipe down the CPU cooler itself. Typically on a brand new build, the CPU cooler will already come with thermal grease applied to it, and it's more than sufficient if you're going to be using the stock cooler. This particular build though, I had to remove the thermal grease because I didn't want to reuse it. Alright, so after a few minutes with the alcohol dried off of the CPU, I'm going to go ahead and apply some of the Arctic Silver 5. And essentially for Intel CPUs, the method to use is a line of thermal grease, and that's recommended by the Arctic Silver 5 people. So you can apply just a small thin line, very thin line of thermal grease, and that's usually enough. Also, a dab, a pea size of thermal grease would also work as well. Alright, so now I'm going to install the CPU cooler, and once you line it all up with the holes here, I'm just going to go ahead and gently press down, and once they all lock into place, and all of the black little tabs here go all the way through, you can go ahead and turn the knobs and press all the way down so that they all lock into place. So once they're all locked into place, should be snug, we can now plug in the CPU fan onto the motherboard, and then you're going to want to make sure that the cable here isn't going to hit the fan, otherwise it'll keep it from spinning. And now we're ready to move on to prep the case. So if you take a look at your motherboard here, this small form factor motherboard has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes that you need, and you can kind of use it as a guide if you want to just line this up with the holes on the motherboard here. But this particular case also comes with a indicator or a little guide here that tells you that micro ATX cases have a specific lettering. So each one of these holes have letters next to them. You can't see it here on the camera, I know, but you can see that it's etched on here, and that it'll say for mini ATX or micro ATX use such and such holes for it. But again, you can also just use this as a guide for you to line up with. So this case also came with a little tool that you could use for the standoffs, so that you can use a screwdriver to tighten these down. Alright, so next we're going to be installing the I/O shield. So just basically line this up with your motherboard here. So we have this motherboard, and it's going to be going in this way. So the I/O shield needs to be placed in this way. And now we're ready to drop in the motherboard. Alright, so now that we got everything lined up, I'm using a magnetic screwdriver. Alright, so next I'm going to be installing the drives. This is the SATA connection side here and the power connection side, and so we want it facing this way. So go ahead and install this, and you can use any of these brackets. I'm just going to go ahead and go random, line this up. And we're going to use the same screws that we used for the motherboard. And then do the same for the other side. Alright, so before we can install the DVD drive, we have to remove one of the faceplates here, and typically there are two little tabs on the side that you can press and take out the faceplate here. And then we'll go ahead and slide in the optical drive. So the screws that we'll be using for the optical drive, the DVD burner, is a fine screw, and so it's a finely threaded screw there, and this is only particular to the optical drive. I don't really know why they make it this way, but this is the screw you have to use to screw into the optical drive here. And once again, do the same for the other side of the optical drive. Alright, so next we're going to install the optional video card, and so you don't necessarily have to do this, but this is for a later upgrade that you might end up doing. And so we first have to remove this bracket. And we will be using this screw once again. So now we're going to slide the video card down into the slot, and this pretty much very much like the RAM that we installed, where there's a missing slot here and there's a notch that we have to line this up with. So I'll go ahead and install that. Alright, so once you have that, you'll see this little tab here will lock into place, and then you can go ahead and screw down the graphics card. Alright, so now we're going to plug in the SATA cables to the hard drive, and you'll notice that the SATA cables is slotted in sort of this L shape here, and that's the female side of the cable, and on the male side of the hard drive it's also slotted like an L shape. So what you're going to do is, and typically it's this little metal locking bracket here is going to be facing up. So once you plug that in, we can now plug in the other side to the motherboard. Alright, so here we have the SATA cable, and don't just plug it straight into the motherboard with the cable dangling hanging out on the front side here. Basically, you're going to want to practice some cable management, and what you can do is just either loop it into this grommet here on the bottom of the case, go into here, and then bring it out into the top of this grommet here, right? Pull this through, and then you're going to want to plug this into the motherboard. Again, lining up that, plug that in there, and try to do a little bit of a better job than I did with this. Alright, so this particular motherboard has the audio connector up near the graphics card, and I had to remove the graphics card so that I can get to it. But essentially, to plug this in, you're going to have a missing slot or a missing pin on the connector, and that's basically your key. And on the motherboard, on the pins, there's going to be one of the pins missing on here. So basically you just got to line up that pin, that missing slot right there, with the missing pin on the motherboard, and then you can plug in the connector. So the same idea is for the USB connector, and on this motherboard the USB connector is on the bottom two here, and essentially you just line up the missing pin with the missing slot, and you can use any of the USB pins that's on the motherboard here. Alright, so now I'm going to install the front panel connectors, and so they're all each labeled here as to what they do. There's the reset switch there, the power LED, which is split in half with the positive and negative connectors there, and then there's the hard drive LED as well as the power switch. This particular case doesn't have a whole lot of front panel connectors, which makes it a much easier. So essentially on the motherboard itself here, this is the front panel connector pins, and on this particular motherboard it does have a guide, and it indicates, it tells you what is going to be plugged into it. So on the top here, I know you can't see it, it's very difficult to see, but on the top it says a message, and on the bottom it says HD, so that's the hard drive LED, and next to it it says PW for the power switch, and underneath that it says RES for the reset switch. And next to them is a positive and negative indicator, and that's basically going to tell you what side it's positive and negative, because on these particular connectors here, if you look on the back, you'll notice that there is a little arrow here that indicates that that connector, that slot or that wire, is the positive connector. So same thing on here, as you can see there, that means that it's a positive end on that, and basically you're just going to line this up with the motherboard pins and whatever it indicates here as to what's positive and negative, and line that up and plug that in. Okay, so now we're going to install the power supply. This particular case does have a bottom grill for air to flow, and so I'll be facing the fan grill here down so that it can bring air in and exhaust air out through the back here. So if your case does not have this grill on it, then you're not going to want to face the fan down. You're going to want to face the fan up, right? So that it could take air in and exhaust it to the back that way. If you face it down, it's not going to be able to take air in and your power supply will overheat. Alright, so once you got it all lined up, we're going to be using these screws here. These are the very coarse screws that the case comes with. Alright, so now we're going to plug in the power to our various components. And so this is the motherboard connector here, and you don't want to just plug that straight into the motherboard with all of this hanging out, blocking airflow to everything. You're going to want to practice cable management, so go ahead and loop it through the grommets here so that it will come out to the other side. Alright, so next is the motherboard 4-pin connector here. You're not going to be using both of these, but just one of these. And it's going to be going all the way up to the top of the corner here, but you don't want to just have this hanging out again. And you're going to want to loop this through the very back of it and come out through the very top here, and so that you can plug this in. Alright, so next is the SATA power connectors, and this is for the hard drive and the optical drive here, and it's essentially the same as the SATA connectors that you just connected with the SATA cables here, as they are slotted as sort of an L shape, kind of upside down L shape thing here, and on the drives itself it's going to be the same. Alright, so for the excess cables here, what you can do is just kind of spread this along the back here and use some extra cable ties or zip ties that you might have laying around, so that you can tie them all up onto these little grommet wire guides here, these little pieces that kind of stick out here. You can just basically tie this around into here. And then tie your cables onto there like that. And while you're back here, there's also this fan attachment here, and you can go ahead and plug that in, any of the extra fan stuff that you have built into your case. And that's pretty much for the power management. And once you're done with that, we can go ahead and reattach the side panel here. Give it a once over, make sure that everything is properly connected. And once we're done with that, we can go ahead and close this up as well, or you can leave it open, it's up to you. Alright, so before we plug in our system and start it up, we got to make sure that the power supply switch is on. So there's a little circle and a little line. You're going to want to make sure that it's switched on to where the line is. and then you can go ahead and plug in your computer. Alright, so I have my keyboard, mouse, and monitor plugged into my system. I'm ready to start it up for the very first time. Make sure that there aren't any cables or wires touching any of the fans, so that when you start it up, it doesn't stop the fans from spinning. You don't want that. It's very bad if that happens. And so when you start it up for the very first time, you're going to hear the fan. It's going to be very loud at first, but then it'll quiet down afterwards. And we're going to go into the BIOS when we first start this up as well. And you may get an error saying that your BIOS settings are not set properly. That's okay. You'll see the screen here. You can either press delete to get into the BIOS, or it's just going to give you a straight up error like this. And so when you have this error, what we're going to want to do is enter into the BIOS setup. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is basically set the boot priority so that the DVD drive can boot our Windows operating system disk. Alright, so here we are in the BIOS settings, and the first thing we want to go over to, and I'm just using the arrow keys to go over to the BIOS feature here, the boot option priority. The first boot option we want is the DVD drive, so basically you want to select that. So you're going to highlight this, press enter, and then make sure that your DVD drive is selected. In my case, it's this bottom one here, the second one where it says DVD RW Pioneer. Right, so select that, and your second boot option, since the only other thing that I could boot from is the hard drive here, that's the first option. Right, so the next thing we're going to want to do, and this is just for later on down the line, is enable the Intel virtualization technology. That's if you want to run virtual machines later on. That's just a more advanced technique or feature, but while you're here you can go ahead and enable that as well. Alright, so another important thing you want to set is the date and time. So over on the Systems tab here, you're going to want to set the date and time. The next thing we're going to go over is to the peripherals here, and we're going to go up to the SATA mode selection. We're going to want to switch this to AHCI. It's a much more advanced, better setting for your hard drive here. And then everything's set to auto. The initial display first, you can choose the PCI Express graphics, since I do have a PCI Express card installed on here. I'll just choose this as my first graphics display port, or graphics display card to show when I have a monitor plugged in. So I'll choose that and just do a manual override on there. Internal graphics, since again I'm using the discrete graphics card, you can leave this at auto, it doesn't matter, but I'm just going to go ahead and disable this. And by disabling that, you remove some of the other options that pertains to the internal integrated graphics. Alright, so once we finish all of the settings, we're going to go over to the far right here, and we're going to go to save and exit. So this first option here is selected. Press enter. Alright, so before I actually save and exit, I'm going to install or insert my Windows 7 installation disk into the DVD drive here so that it can boot up. And I'll go ahead and press enter to restart my system. So once I boot up the system, it's going to ask me to press any key to continue. And so it's going to load up the Windows installation disk environment. And we'll go through the process of installing Windows now. Alright, so the first screen we are presented here with is the welcome screen, and we're just going to go ahead and click on next. Then we'll click on install now. Then we'll accept the license terms. Click on next. We're going to want to go to custom advanced installation, and we're going to select our drive here, and we're going to go ahead and wipe out our drive. So we'll click on drive options, then click on delete, then click on OK, and then we'll click on new, click on apply, OK again. It's going to create two separate partitions here, and we're going to select the one that shows the disk 0 partition 3, the one with the largest total size of our hard drive, and we'll click on next. And this process is pretty much going to take about 30 to 40 minutes. Alright, so to finish up the installation, we have to create a user account, and we'll go ahead and type it in now. And for a password, I'm not going to leave a password, I'll just leave it blank. So click on next. And for a product key, I'll be putting this in later on. And then I'll go ahead and click on use recommended settings for the automatic updates. And so we'll check on the time here, and the time needs to be set. We'll click on next. And now it's going to finish up and finalize the installation and bring us to the desktop. Alright, so the installation is complete. Now we are going to install the drivers discs, and this is the disc that comes with the motherboard. When you open up your box to the motherboard, it comes with this disc here. A lot of people ask me, what is this disc for? Essentially, not all the hardware that's on your motherboard or your computer is working within Windows here. So what we need to do is install the drivers, and that's what's on this disc here, is all of the motherboard drivers for your particular motherboard. So we'll go ahead and insert that, take out the Windows 7 installation disk, and once we install that, I can show you real quick here. If you right click on my computer and go to properties, then go over to device manager, and as you can see here, there's a few components that isn't working properly or isn't installed correctly. So essentially, you also want to go online to download the latest drivers for your particular system, but as you can see here, the Ethernet port isn't working, so you're not going to be able to even get online. So it's good to have this disk and install this disk first before anything, so that you can get online and download the proper drivers. Alright, so next we're going to install the drivers disk, and so once you insert this disk in there, you'll get this window that pops up. And so what we're going to then install is pretty much everything except the Splash Top Connect. That's just bloatware, we don't need any of that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we'll click on install all. And now it's going to install. It's going to restart a couple of times, and once you're done with that, it'll be finished with the drivers. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do now is install the graphics drivers. This is the disk that comes with the box of your graphics card. And so once you insert that and you start it up, just basically start the installation process, choose your Windows version, and I'm using it Windows 7 64-bit. So once you click on that, the graphics drivers software is going to start, and you're going to install them. So then we're going to agree and continue, we'll do the express, and also install the nVidia update. And that's pretty much it for this system build. After this, you're going to want to hook up to the internet and download and install all of the updates through Windows, as well as your various programs. I suggest using a website called Ninite, and I have another video for that I'll put a link to in the description as well as the video. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.